Call to order the City Council work session for the City of East Grand Forks for Tuesday, July 27th. It is now 5 o'clock. Would the City Clerk please call roll?
Mayor Seecander.
Here.
Council President Mark Holstead.
Here.
Vice President Tim Greenway.
Here.
Council members Clarence Better.
Here.
Dale Helms.
Here.
Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Present.
Brian Larson.
Here.
Does determine quorum. Move on to number 1, update on 2022 federal Subtarget project. Mr. Murphy.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll be kind of brief on getting going on this. We'll have to get some discussion on this. But on Wednesday, July 21st, the MPO board tabled the city's amendment request to the long-range transportation plan to include the reconstruction of an extension of 10th Street. So a copy of the email was included in your packet there. Mr. Haugen is here as well. So I guess what we're looking at is they are, according to the email, the MPO tabled this for a couple of reasons. The main one being looking for some explanation from the council, from the city, as far as why we would be the need for this particular project to be added to the long-range transportation plan. So I guess what I'm looking for tonight is either to respond to that and kind of let them know what we're looking at for the 10th Street and why it might fit in, or to look for a project that would still be within the long-range transportation plan that we could potentially still get done in the timeline that is allowed. So I guess with that, I'll take any questions the council might have. But I guess, yeah, so that's it. So we need to either explain to MPO satisfaction what we're looking at or move to another project.
I guess first thing that maybe I want to touch base on, I guess the things that they brought up in the email, and maybe the members of the MPO can expound on the decision. The items in that email, and if they are even attainable, if they're not attainable, we move it to the side and move on and discuss what we need to do for a project. If these are not attainable, I guess I would like to hear why they wouldn't be attainable, and or if these are the MPO's wishes and not anything to do with MnDOT or the state, federal, whatever, I guess I would like to hear that reasoning why also. So I guess if Mr. Haugen or Mr. Demers or Mr. Vetter would like to expound on that, I'd appreciate it. And then I could maybe ask Mr. Emery to address if some of these issues can be attainable or not attainable, and from the aspect of the MPO standpoint. So,
If you want to go with your senior member, so I can talk too, but go ahead.
Either or. Some of the discussion at MPO is that they're concerned that the road doesn't go anywhere. So they were looking at how does this road connect with other roads within the industrial park, and what's your plan to get those roads all connected. Minnesota DOT had some concerns that the road was labeled the way it was as a connector, or
labeled as a major collector as the functional classification of it.
and they had some concerns with
Which is
that road.
classified by who, Earl? MnDOT or MPO? Who does the classifications?
All three of us.
Huh?
All three of us agree to the classifications.
So Minnesota DOT was surprised that it was classified the way it was, and didn't feel like it was even eligible for federal funding, but because it was classified, it is. So those were the concerns of the MPO.
so maybe expound on that and make clarify for me, if it's labeled that by, and all three parties agreed to it, and it's on the list of, eligible, I wouldn't see the issue. Were they saying that we should never been done in the first place, and they never should have agreed upon it in the first place? Is that what you're saying?
Well, and I think that's one issue. I think the bigger issue is the overall, how does this one section of road in the big picture, how is that going to develop in the industrial park? I mean, right now it's a road to nowhere, essentially. MPO wants to know, you know, in the study area, how is this road going to connect to all the other roads? How is the plan for the future to pay for that connectivity and make it all a viable transportation area?
I think all along, too, I think the discussion we've had in the past, and also maybe with even EDA, was the looking at expanding our industrial park area, and that would be the major artery back there toward that expansion. And I think maybe that could have been explained to the MnDOT and maybe the MPO board also. I'm not sure if it was or not, but I think that, you know, discussion should have been maybe brought up and looked at. So, I mean, other than them, MnDOT wondering about the classification of it, what other aspects of the MPO's, I guess, questions and can be attainable or not attainable? If they can't be attainable and MPO has to agree to it, are we at a standstill and this project's pretty much dead in the water? I guess when we get to it.
Address the functional classification?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to start off by saying it was, you know, at the meeting last week, it was a pretty deliberative, sober discussion amongst, you know, the members of MPO about this project. We take, I think, to a person on the board, these issues pretty seriously, you know, and we take the mission of that board of providing effective, efficient transportation connections for multimodal purposes very seriously. And we take that as a charge of the federal government because we're dealing with federal dollars, those type of things. So, in fact, planning is in the name, right? I mean, so it shouldn't surprise people that it's deliberative, it's a slow process, it doesn't react well to quick change. So I just want to preface that was kind of part of the context of the meeting. On the means of the functional classification of 10th, I think the real concern is that upon review, the terms in which roads were classified in the past has been much looser. And the fear is, or one of the, not, that shouldn't be the concern is that as we go through the 2020 census process, as we look to, and then as part of that, we reclassify these roads every 10 years or, you know, in fact, we're doing that in the Grand Forks side through the MPO process. We have to justify classifying these roads. And some of the concern is that MnDOT has raised is that they don't believe that with the traffic and the type of road it is, it will not meet the classification. Now, does it meet it right now? Possibly. But it goes to some of the planning aspect, as I was talking before, is, so say we do, and the concern about the spot improvement. So if you do this chunk, and you could probably justify it as on a, you know, collector, or I forget what it is. Is it
Major collector.
Is it a major collector?
Yep.
Okay, so as a major collector, it could justify. But then the part is that how do you, even though you say it's a part of your plan to develop this area for additional economic growth, you know, more industrial park growth, just saying that that's what your plan is doesn't. They want more, you know, written down. They want this as a legitimate plan with funding and all those types of things. So what I think people in the, you know, the MnDOTs, the federal government, they're very cognizant of not building, I think Clarence said, the bridge to nowheres, right? They don't want something stuck in the middle where you spend a couple $1 million and the local government or local entity doesn't have the funds or the plan to build that out. So what they don't want is that chunk there from 13th to, or 11th to 17th or wherever it would be, to sit there and then not have a plan or the funds to go after building 13th out, or it doesn't necessarily connect with Highway 2, or it doesn't really, I mean, it's a gravel road out to 5th. It doesn't connect. So I think that's the concern. It doesn't, while we say we have an idea, I've said I want to build out the industrial park, but we don't have a concrete plan of how we're going to do that, what it's going to look like, how we plan to get there from here, and we just don't. So that's part of the concern that was brought up on the functional classification. We can go into others or whatever as we go, but I just want to give my opinion of what the conversation was during that process.
Okay, so, I mean, with that said, and looking at what the MPO has sent back to us and raised, can we go any further with this, or is this thing dead in the water? Because what was raised and what you just said, Mr. Demers, this is something we can't do. We can't ask to amend it. We can't ask to move forward. I mean, are we at that point? So the reason I ask, because I don't want to sit around and go round and round and go back to MPO and they still say, no, we can't do it. And MnDOT's fine with it, and then MPO's not, or whatever it may be, or MnDOT's against it, whatever it is. So, I mean, how much time do we sit and talk about this and go through it, where then all of a sudden we're going back to MPO and they still say no? You know, maybe Earl, you can give an opinion to that, not sure.
Well, just as a clarification, that MPO hasn't said no to anything.
Oh, I know that.
Simply just said, let's put a second here. because we don't
Indications
wanna-
all tabling in would lead to anybody talking through this that it'd be a no, okay? So that's where I'm getting at. I don't want to waste everybody's time on something that we get back to 2-3 weeks, a month down the road, because we don't have 2-3 weeks, a month down the road to all can circle back and have the same conversation. So I guess that's point blank answer is, do we need to stop, we're talking about 10th Street and move on to something else? Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. President. I think we're all kind of on the same page. All of our minds are going down the road of where you are as for, do we have the time to do the due diligence, to answer the questions that will be brought forward by the MPO in the timelines that we have, to get this project funded and get it built in the timelines that we have. I do want to step back and say we're proud of the people that serve on the MPO. From both sides of the river, from all jurisdictions. We're proud of the staff. We're pleased with the work that you do. You're very strategic in land use and zoning and transportation. We're very thankful for the work you do until you come with a decision we don't like. And that's kind of where we find ourselves. You know, the council had hoped to move forward with 10th, or at least a number of folks on the council. And yet, if through the process that we've all agreed to through the MPO, if time doesn't allow for that, then we will absolutely have to reconsider if this is our top project, and if not, then what is. And in some private conversations, and anyone else can address it, it seems to me, Mr. President, also to your concern, that we probably don't have time to do the back and forth that would be necessary. You know, question raised, question answered, question raised. You know, sometimes you answer one question and it yields 5 more questions, and then pretty soon it tangles up a bit. I do want to say, as much as this might look and feel like a road to nowhere, keep in mind the only use of this road is not what extends out to Highway 2. This is a feeder for all of those other roads going north into our industrial park. So even though it might feel like a road to nowhere, if the end of it doesn't go to somewhere, all of those perpendicular streets are feeding our industrial park. And this one is in disrepair. It's pooling water. And so even though it doesn't maybe connect to Highway 2 on the eastern end, it serves an important purpose even now to those businesses and other entities inside of our industrial park. And all that can happen, you know, through give and take. This is still a high project. It's in one of our, I'd say, top 5 transportation infrastructure projects for our community. And so whatever status it has in this conversation, I do encourage us to continue, maybe even through the MPO, if this goes off to the side and another one is our favorite project, that we go through those steps of answering those questions and showing the benefit of this road and really what should be the future of the road, how it's improved over time. So I'm very content if through a deliberative process, this one, we don't have time to fit inside of this budgeting cycle. This one can go to the side, another one step up and take its place. And yet I do encourage us to continue work on it for the benefit of our industrial park, current residents there, current businesses there, and into the future. Thanks.
Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would join. I definitely do not believe it's a road to nowhere. I guess what I'm talking about is, in the macro sense, it's a part of a road that when we look at things on the MPO side, we're looking at the macro transportation, not the more micro or localized traffic. So it has to connect in that type of a framework, right? So I probably more than anybody would say that it's definitely a road to somewhere. But we have to make it work within a master plan, and we have to make it go there. On the timelines, I don't want to get too far over my skis here, but I don't know if the timeline is necessarily as tight as we think. I mean, we discussed briefly at the MPO, and Earl, please save me if I get too far out over my skis. But one of the options could be is that we seek out a swap with MnDOT to, for these dollars, and that may give us time to further study that if that's what the council would like to do. It defers the project 1 year. But am I correct or incorrect, Earl?
It's an option.
There are some definite staff hurdles and kind of issues with, how things have to go with the process of our plans and all those type of things going forward that end up kind of not falling directly in line or having to be redone if we do some of these things. But potentially, like, you could design some sort of study, maybe it's an industrial park type study or a connector study if you think that you can do it, and have that added to the work plan for next year and still maybe get that in for the next year. I don't know all the specifics of that. But I guess that would be one option. I don't want necessarily, like I said, it's one option. The other option is do the projects that are already planned. And I guess one of the frustrations I have outside of this is that it seems like if we have projects that are planned, we aren't going to do the work that it takes to get them done. And it becomes a kind of a catch-22 that we end up in ourselves, or a negative feedback loop of, well, we're not going to do the project, so then we're not going to go forward with doing the work that it takes to prepare the project. Well, we're not going to do the work that it takes to prepare the project, so we're not going to do the project. And that's what's happened with the projects that have been done, or that are high on the list already. So I feel like we're kind of, in order for me to have any faith that we'd be able to look at this as part of a extended study, I would need some reassurance from the council that we are going to do the work that it takes to get that preliminary work done, so that when this project comes up, whether it's at this funding cycle or whatever, that it's actually ready to go.
With that, my question would be to Earl is what Mr. Demers indicated, and then just maybe expound on it. What is the likelihood in parameters that we would have to follow if we wanted to swap with MnDOT, and is it a guaranteed swap, or are we playing roulette if we let them have it and then ask to do it? Mr. Emery can answer that too if you want. But
I've had discussion with MnDOT about possibly swapping it. And sure, MnDOT has said that, they can find a project where they can utilize these funds. It's just a matter of how and when we're going to get those funds back from whoever got our funds. So.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be, in the past we've looked at like a regional swap, like within our Subtarget group, and we've looked at that, but this would potentially, and like I said, if I get too far over my skis, it would potentially be a swap with MnDOT itself. so MnDOT could use these funds on a project.
Statewide.
I don't know the parameters of these funds, but I would have,
You know,
but it basically becomes an accounting swap, on a
No, it's
cycle.
because I checked with the other 3 communities in our, in our district, Thief
Right.
River, Crookston, Bemidji, and asked about swapping with them, and none of them were interested in swapping.
Right, and that's
So
why I asked.
Yep.
Right. And like I said, this isn't like one of our
Global.
Subtarget.
We're
group.
talking
This
more
would be
statewide. That's
with
why I'm
MnDOT.
raising the question. Maybe Earl can address that, because I know you talked to them locally. I get that.
It would be a district swap, not a statewide swap, would be the most likely scenario. The city subtargets, most cities aren't prepared to deliver their project a year ahead of time. That's what we'd be asking. So that's why they're not a good match. MnDOT delivers projects, millions of dollars worth of projects, year in, year out. Again, it's something that the ATP does on a routine basis, particularly for transportation alternative projects that don't get delivered on the year that they requested the funds. MnDOT will use those funds in the MnDOT project. They'll have the records in place to show that when the project can be delivered, they'll have access to the MnDOT dollars that year. That's the whole concept that I've thrown out there, and it's something that Steve has talked to MnDOT about, so it's a possibility.
I do have a question about that, and we've raised it to Steve Emery. I don't know if you've gotten the answer or not, but let's just say we do a swap with MnDOT. We slide 1 year in the cycle, and it's a 4-year cycle?
Currently it is, yes.
So then would we be eligible again in 3 years after our project, or 4? It'd be 3, so we would not slip a year in the out-year cycle. That's favorable.
Basically an accounting swap.
Yeah, just for that year, and then you stay in the 4-year cycle that you are, you don't slip a year. So to me, that's a big deal. Yeah, every year that you would slip, it's like you gave away a fourth of your money, but we wouldn't slip.
No.
We'd be right back to the right spot again. Thank you.
So if I'm following Mr. Demers correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Well,
Is that-
Earl could correct you.
No, on your
I
comment,
definitely-
on your comments, not,
Yeah.
if, let's say that we go the route of swapping or asking to swap, and we look at a project on here, whatever it may be, XYZ, that you're wanting to have all the studies done, everything done, minus what can't be done, I guess, whatever that would be, before we go back to MnDOT to say this is what we want to do, swap, we're going to do a study on this, we're going to do it the following year, but we're going to have everything done, squared away, and ready to go. So what you're saying essentially that planning and everything else and studies and.
And I don't know what phase the land use plan, or, or if there could be something, never mind, scratch it. I don't know if it could be a study, or if it's eligible for study added to the work plan for our industrial park, how we would deal with access management to additional industrial park expansion.
Let me raise the question to you then. Let's say we do this study for the industrial park, and we go through that, and we bring it back to the MPO and have them look at it, and we still raise some questions. I mean, and we're going in the circle, we keep coming back to a point where we're like, okay, what do we do now? We can't go forward with this, my biggest thing is with the MPO is the question of the unknown. Is, let's say we meet some of these questions or answer these things and get to a point and they still say, well, we don't still think it qualifies. And then with the question that MnDOT raised, I was surprised that it got the designation it has. So my worry is we do all this work, we get to a point again where we're back in the same location talking about, well, what do we do now? Mr. Larson?
Yeah, I had a similar concern, and, the elephant in the room is obviously the roundabout project, right, which was vetoed, and, as far as my ability, that is dead. But if we go down this rabbit hole of this industrial park update and it still doesn't go anywhere, we're going to be kicking ourselves for not trying to bring this roundabout back to life and building something. I really feel that. I know that it's vetoed and it's not something I can bring up to the agenda, but that's what's in the back of my head as we go through this conversation. Are we in this spiral here with the MPO not getting the support for the industrial park, and this project that we could have built just dies on the vine? You know, that should be a real concern, I think, as we think hard about how to move forward here.
Thank you, sir. Mayor?
And I agree with you. It would sure be my preference to spend these dollars even as they're scheduled to be spent. Okay, that would for sure be my preference. And then it's for this group to decide what is the best and highest use of those dollars. If it's the roundabout, if that's what the group decides, or if it is some way to do 10th, or maybe we do take another look at 5th. 5th from roughly Shopco to roughly 20th. That's all broken up, you know, that's on the list. And as I've driven around and considered whether it's going to be the Reinhardt urbanized section, whether it's going to be all the other ones, that 5th, replacing those concrete panels or the reconstruction also is going to be, better be on our radar and probably should be part of this discussion right here. And it is on the list of, to some degree in that long-range plan with the MPO already. So for me, my preference would be to decide what is our highest community priority that would qualify and get that built.
Anybody else have any thoughts or questions right now? Mr. Riefel?
I think I'm going to use Mr. Demers' thing in that if we talk about the roundabout, we have to say there's no real value at that particular location for us to redo that road, put a roundabout there. The roundabout should have been discussed down by the bridge where the stoplights are. So that's where Mr. Vetter said the quagmire comes in. Everything backs up there from there. That's where the roundabout should have been. The roundabout where we have it has no perceived value. There's no value over keeping it like it is. There was none, according to the initial report. There is nothing that said that the accidents are going to be less, that they were more at one and not at the other. So I look at it, either we move it down to that other thing, but I think that one would be off the board. 10th, we still have an opportunity on with the right amount of work.
Thank you, Mr. President. I disagree with you, and that's no surprise. The roundabout does a number of things. It helps access onto Bigland Road for everyone that lives down that way. If you put a roundabout at the stoplights, it does nothing for access. The bridge study that MPO is doing right now is identifying Bigland Road and Reinhardt intersection, and I'm probably going to get the dates wrong, but 2030 it's going to have a rating of an F. However, the study is thinking that the roundabout was still going in when they were doing the study, and with the roundabout going in, it brings it back down to a level of C. So there is some benefit to the roundabout, and where I'm at, that should be our discussion, is the roundabout.
And I would just, I don't want to try to paint our partners in Grand Forks like they're coming down and trying to dictate what it is, but in discussion with them, one of the key factors that I think we have to be cognizant of as we think about this as a metropolitan plan is, we're trying to build a bridge on the south end of town. And as we do that, they're part of this traffic study that Mr. Larson's talking about, and they're seeing some of these effects, and they're saying, why are we building a bridge? Or why would we want to build a bridge if you're unwilling to do the things that are outlined as mitigating factors? So I'm not saying that they're sitting in MPO meetings saying, we're not going to build a bridge unless you do this and this. But there have been conversations that are like, what's going on here? I know that's kind of one of the unspoken things that's been said or hasn't been said at that meeting is, well, you got this issue here. You want to alleviate it down here, but you got to take care of it here too. That's one of the reasons that's driving this push towards this. But back to the original thing is, I think, like I said, I don't have any problem if we can work with Earl and Steve as to try to, if the council would be willing to, is to work on a 1-year swap with MnDOT, try to work in an industrial park access and pavement management and funding plan. I don't know if that's within the scope of what we could do, but I would propose doing that in our next year's work plan if the funding is available and all those type of things. And then, but like I said before, is the current program plan that we have requires us to do things that, we need to take some action on acquiring properties, and that can't be an issue if this is the plan going forward. You can't say, well, we can't acquire property if we don't have a plan, and then you can't say, well, we don't have a plan because we don't acquire property. So I think we should actively acquire that property, because whether or not you say you want to do this in 20 years or 30 years, or you want to add these, I don't know if you've seen the street lights that are going in North Dakota, but they take up way more room than, even if you want street lights there, they're going to take up a bunch of room. We need to acquire a bunch of property at that intersection, because no matter what, we know that that intersection fails very quickly, because that's the only place that we have to grow really on the south end, is down that corridor. So, like I said, we need to be much more aggressive, and I don't think that's a thing that means that we need to treat our residents poorly, but we need to have a plan and to take care of acquiring the property that's necessary to do whatever we need to do at that intersection going forward.
Mayor?
And just, I want to make sure we're crystal clear. You are proposing that we go ahead and acquire property around Bigland and Reinhardt.
Correct.
Whether we're doing a roundabout now or 2 years or 3 years from now, you'd like to see that still go forward like that?
Yes.
I don't disagree.
I mean, the properties, I don't think, well, who knows, never say never, but property's never going to be, if we wait 20 years, the property's going to be 20 times more expensive. If we wait whatever, and I think we owe it to our residents as well as to be definitive with our planning and our actions. We've been saying that we need to take action at that intersection for 15 years, and we're kind of, it's actually a bit rude not to do anything and just keep them in lurch, I think. So I would, like I said, I can see going forward with that type of a plan, if Earl would say, is that something that's workable on the MPO side? Can we put that type of a study into our work plan for 2022, or is it full, or what?
We're tight,
We are tight.
yes.
What's the cost of a study of that type? 50,000, 30,000?
It would be less than
150,000.
most studies. Traffic operations isn't going to be a big concern. You're not looking at signalization, stop control, turn lanes. So,
But it would you'd have to figure out what you're doing at 2, which is,
MnDOT pretty much has a plan for what they're going to do at 2.
So, I wanted to just make sure I understood correctly. You were talking about some property acquisition, regardless of what we decide, or at the very least, some clarity of what that would look like. And then, you could go forward in a very peaceful way if let's say that isn't the preferred project, hypothetically, the roundabout at Bigland and Reinhardt. You could go forward in a pretty peaceful way, to say, look, this is what that would look like, and you're not, holding a gun to our residents' head and saying it's coming in next year, but it would be in a more cooperative and methodical way, if it went that way. And then finally, part of this discussion always should be, next item anyhow, In the corridor study, it showed that there isn't an urgent safety concern now. It is maybe somewhere in the future. The do-nothing option was the recommended option for that intersection because of the safety profile, and there's not been a documented accident there during the time of the study period. And finally, the idea of a signalized intersection at 13th and Bigland is not dead. I mean, it's still in play based on some counts and whatnot. And that would improve the access also. I kind of like the Reinhardt access in a way because it's a natural, they're already trying to go north and they could just come right in, bing, bing, if it's a roundabout. So it would flow very well. I have no concern that a roundabout at Bigland and Reinhardt would flow very well. It would. It's all about cost and priority as to, and then also have we done our due diligence with the neighbors. But I do think we have a greater concern for pedestrian safety at 13th, and that would also improve access to some degree if we could get a signal in there. And I know I have some detractors in this area, but that's my heart, is to keep the kids safe, and which would improve access in the same stroke, and then keep in play this possibility of roundabout at Bigland and Reinhardt. Keep it in play, keep it moving forward. I agree. I've said the same to Mr. Murphy at a meeting in the last week. The biggest mistake we make as government sometimes is a project isn't going to happen right here. You work it so far, and then you stop. And because your attention goes elsewhere, you don't finish the next planning steps that would make it, I know nobody likes the words shovel ready, but if you have some shovel ready plans or close to it, and then the funding comes, that's favorable. That's what we should be doing.
Okay, so my next question, and I'll go to you if you have something else, is let's say we do that, Mr. Demers, and we look at doing a study. Are we going to be under the gun for the funding to say we want to swap it for, is it 23 then? Or would we have to go 24 funding, swapping with MnDOT? That's what I'm asking. Would that be enough time for things to go through, to have everything the way you indicated, Mr. Demers, to have a sound plan laid out and study done, everything to the council, then to the MPO, to make sure that this is something that can be done, and the timelines that we would be swapping, or would we say, well, okay, MnDOT, we're probably going to go out 2 years. I'm just asking the question because you would know the timelines better, Mr. Emery, too, of how long would plan working with the MPO of whatever we need to do.
Can we use the funding that we just got, the extra 20,000?
Yes,
For that
the
type of
board could reprioritize those funds, yep.
And is that something that we would add to, because like you said, we'd take that off the top of our, that's the first dollars that would come off of our plan right now, right? But potentially, like, could we amend a work program to move that up, that type of a study?
Yes.
One question I have, Earl, is when will these roads be reclassified again? Because my thought is if MPO does not, or MnDOT does not agree with the classification now, and they are reclassified in, let's say, 2 years, maybe now that street, 10th Street isn't federally eligible because it's not a minor arterial or above.
That goes back to part of the concern about putting money into a chunk of it is what happens if
The functional class will be automatically reviewed after the 2020 census results are out, and they do a boundary that's called an urbanized area boundary that usually changes every 10 years, and our federal program has to match that boundary. And so as you look at the boundary being changed, that means you're either expanding functional classification to meet the new boundary, or you're contracting functional class to a rural setting. So that's an automatic occurrence. We all know the 2020 census has been delayed. It's going to be released here in August. The delay also is going to cause delay in all the subsequent releases most likely. So 2023 would be a year that I would peg that we'll be looking at functional reclassifications. It was done in 2015. MnDOT staff has turned over considerably. Federal Highway Minnesota staff has turned over considerably since then. And so that's where you have new eyes looking at things.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's what we've seen too in the last year of discussions with the MnDOT. They've been looking at ways to turning back some streets and swapping streets with local entities to,
Yep.
so I think that's in their master plan, is to eliminate some things. So, but, I'm sorry, Mr. Larson,
It seems like the conversation's kind of gone, we're kind of talking about two things at once a little bit, so I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page as everyone else. We're talking about a study. It's a study of 10th Street with the industrial
Right.
park, right? So the other projects that are not going forward, we're not confusing the two things. I think I would certainly be in favor of pushing forward a study. The investment in the industrial park is also a major priority for the EDA. So I think there's certainly a way to work together, perhaps combine some funding together to make this kind of holistic view of how the industrial park moves forward. Infrastructure, attracting private business, it all works together. And it seems like it makes a ton of sense. And I would be in favor of, if we had to delay this project a year to get the right plan in place, then let's move forward with that plan. It seems like the only tenable plan that we have at the table at the moment.
sorry, you have a response to, okay, go ahead.
One question I guess I have maybe for Earl too is, we can study the industrial park to death, but the only street out there that's ever going to qualify for any federal funding is 10th Street. Whether it's
Well,
11th.
you used a broad term, any federal funding. I think the
Subtarget
normal
dollars.
transportation funding that we rely on year in, year out,
right.
it would be true, but
Right.
there are other federal funds. I'm sure Paul could talk about EDA funds of some sort. There are other transportation dollars. So
You're correct. I was referring to the federal subtarget dollars. The only street that's ever going to be eligible out there for our subtarget dollars is 10th Street. Because none of those other ones, 11th, 13th, 15th, are ever going to have a class. They're not under our state aid system, and they're not classified as a minor arterial or above.
Oh, just a little closer to the mic.
Oh.
Another meeting, they reported that they had trouble catching your voice.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
Anything else then? So, I had a question, now you interrupted my.
Sorry, brother.
Mr. Murphy, go ahead.
So I guess this question would be for Earl. So if we would look at switching with MnDOT, and swapping that out, again, we look at the whole timeline deal. Do you have any estimate or guess what kind of timeline we could get an answer from MnDOT, whether that's a viable option?
2 weeks would be more than enough time for the MnDOT to take action on that request.
That's sooner than I thought. Okay.
On the fiscal swap. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I thought you were talking about whether or not it's going to be classified or not.
I
was
meant
like,
I meant the
that's
the
pretty
fiscal swap, if that's
bold
even an
statement.
option. Yeah.
So with that said, with the direction of Mr. Demers asking us to do that and going forth, and we've had some agreement. And you also mentioned the work on the study and the bridge, hopefully down the road, and also the work on Reinhardt and Bigland. Would that be a request to also next year to study besides 10th Street? I just want to make sure that, or are you talking later with that? I just want to make sure, because you.
No, I don't. I think we've already studied we have the Bigland corridor study, I think.
Right, I understand that, but I'm talking
We're doing
about
stuff on the bridge
the
right now.
buyout and stuff like that. That's where
Yep.
I was going with your comments that you made. Would you want to have that run concurrently, which we can add on to another agenda down the road for work session here in the near future? Just asking.
I guess I would say that would be something that I would be putting in, because when we're talking about doing the engineering studies and what would need, finding out truly what would need to be acquired for property acquisition, the amounts, and, what, what we would have to spend for property acquisition. I mean, all those numbers greatly exceed what I can spend without council authorization. So, if it's something that we wanted to look at and we wanted to get something, like say shovel ready, that would be something that I would need council action to
No,
authorize.
that's fine.
Absolutely,
Yep.
absolutely.
That's why I was asking what direction you wanted on it. so.
I mean, I would suggest, if this is something we know, if we're talking about a bridge project, if we're talking about other projects like this where we know, or even if you're looking at Bigland and 13th or Greenway, there's potentially some property acquisition. If we should almost have a standing, or not a standing committee, but we should start a strategy. I would imagine it would have to be in closed session because we're talking, some legal, fiscal strategies. But start the process, start to get some feel of what we're comfortable with doing. Get a plan together of how we plan on acquiring property, or which property we think we need in the city, whether it's these projects or projects down the road or what. I would say that that's something that we should do and give you the direction of how to set that up, and then figure out what authority needs to be granted. And we have a budget cycle coming up right now. We should be talking about how much we're willing to allocate. I think it goes back, we've talked about it, this circular no thing, like that's another no, like we don't know how to do it, right? So then we just say, we're not going to do anything, so we're not going to purchase property, right? Because you don't have the authority to do it. We haven't told you what to buy because the plan is a general, it's basically a development, site development plan or whatever right now. So it's like, well, do you need every inch here or what? But at some point, you just need to do, right? We need to start down the road on some of this. And I would just suggest that we, whether it's, if it's part of a strategic plan that you want, or your strategic meetings, and we have one that's a closed session on some of this, maybe that, I don't know what Ron wants to rule on that, but I would think at some point we have a legal and fiscal strategy that we need to come up with that should be private.
So we can address that in another work session that we
Right.
can bring forth.
Oh, absolutely.
So right now, I guess we're looking at going the route of asking for MnDOT swap and to allow, I guess, do we need to bring back anything to discuss what parameters we need in the study, or is that something MPO does on their own? I guess, Mr. Allegan, do we need direction from the council from a standpoint of, hey, we wanted this to be allowed by MPO, this is the parameters that we want in there? Is that something you need in the resolution that comes from the council?
One suggestion I would have is have Jason, Steve, Mr. Gorte, and Nancy probably think about that area and come up with the questions that the MPO should look to answer. Some of it, I mean, that's 4 of our key players.
We
out
don't
there,
have
right?
to have that to next week.
No, I'm just saying, like,
I just want to make
if we
time,
want
I'm
to
going
study,
through my
those
mind
are 4 of the
timelines,
people
but
I
you
think should
need
be.
a resolution from the council authorizing you to do a swap.
To do the swap with MnDOT for this $2022?
Yes.
It would be authorization of your staff to communicate with MnDOT. And if that swap happens, then you would be communicating that you guys reached an agreement to the MPO, and we'll adjust our documents based on that swap.
And so
For
maybe,
the study, we'll need a resolution from the council saying,
What we need.
we want you to study.
which we can get to later.
Right.
But for right now, for Mr. Murphy, I guess you need to let us know as a council what we need to bring forth at the next council meeting to allow what we want to do for the swap.
Yeah, that's a good
If
question,
that's-
and I guess I would defer to the MPO on that. That's outside of my area of expertise, really. As far as getting into the federal Subtarget dollars and swapping that out. That's just something I have not had any experience with. I would hope that MPO, with our being our representative on that, would be able to guide me on what I would need to do for that?
I just want to make sure that we're staying on task, we're not missing something, oh, we got to come back, and we got to do this. It's
And I think what you were saying for Mr. Murphy is if they need some authorization from us to go forward, that would be our part, is basically to authorize them to do it.
That's
Yeah.
what I meant.
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to put her on the spot here, but I would hope that he would help guide me through that process, just because it's something that I just have never.
Well, it
Worked
sounds
on.
like Steve's got some,
Again, just to rephrase, I did ask the question of our district state aid engineer about the possibility of swapping with MnDOT, and he said that is an option, but again, if we swap with another community, whatever, with MnDOT in general, we can do that. He just isn't sure yet at this point when and how we may get that money back. So it can be done, but, and again, maybe it's a matter of, again, talking to our district state aid engineer, John Mason, our MnDOT representative, and just telling him this is the wish of the council, and,
I guess I do have a pretty good working relationship. It's fairly new, but I have met with Mr. Mason.
Maybe I'm ahead of myself too, but maybe I should step back and make sure all the council members are fine with this. So I apologize for that. So maybe if you want to address it, yes, you're fine with us doing that swap to make sure we're doing the right thing here and going the right direction. Or no, so we need to make sure. Mr. Johnson, you okay with that?
This whole thing has been like a game of what do they call that? Chutes and ladders? Where we're going up the board on the ladder, and we get up high on this 10th Street, and all of a sudden we're down through the slide in the basement. And now what are we talking about here? We want to delay the game?
Well, basically what we're asking to do is, so we don't miss out on the dollars for next year, since there was some questions that were raised from the MPO on maybe some qualifying and approving that we need to take time to take a step back and take a look at it and swap on, basically on paper from one year to another, so we can utilize these dollars still. So, and with that, take the time to do the study and take a look at it to make sure we're doing correctly.
I'm okay with that, President.
Okay. Mr. Elms?
Yep,
Okay.
I'd be fine with it.
Sorry, I should have did that first. I apologize.
I don't have a problem with delaying it a year. I just don't know that 10th Street's going to rise to the top of the cream. You're going to do a study, you're going to have a minimum of 6 months before the study's ever done. Part of the study involves public input. So what do you do after the 6 months if the study comes back and says the roads are perfectly fine the way they are?
But they're not, so.
Well, I mean, from a transportation standpoint, yeah, they are. From a functional that, okay, they're not draining or what have you, then no, they're not. I'm just throwing it out there. What do you do if the study
I
comes
get you,
back and says from a transportation standpoint?
Well, for transportation wise, the roundabout road is fine too. So, and for everything else, the road is fine. For driving on it, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with the road. So,
I don't think.
whatever sticks to the wall when we're going back and forth is going to stick to the wall.
Yeah, I don't think we're any worse off if we've gone through the study. We have all our options available to us at that moment, including the roundabout, including 10th, including 5th. Even at that juncture, we have all our options still open to us. So we've just seen if 10th would hit the bar with the MPO process.
Mr. Riepel?
What I'm also getting out of this is this swap, if it does transpire, we could possibly not get the funding returned to us in the year 2023.
We would need that reassurance.
It could be 2024, depending on when that whoever they swap with, community gets their funding, is what I'm getting.
So then we get it in 24 and then we get it in 26 again, right?
Still in the hopper.
So,
I'll just throw this out there, and you could have a new council then by that might have different
Good,
priorities.
too.
Definitely.
I can guarantee you right now you will.
Yeah. I thought you'd be our next Henry.
I'm only going to be 52 this year. Come on. All right. I think we're
You digress.
okay with that?
Could I just add?
Yes, Mr. Elgin.
The MPO board did authorize going forward with some other amendments to the transportation plan. So just not to confuse you, that there has been a request submitted to the city to consider amending the city transportation plan because of some amendments that are coming through the MPO board. It was just one project that was tabled. There are 5 other ones that were moved forward.
Which are on the North Dakota side, correct?
4 of the 5 are on the North Dakota side.
Also 220.
220 north, from 23rd north 8 miles was overlooked, I think was a simple answer, and they have to do a pavement project on the 8 miles, and 2 of them come into our realm.
You think 10th was overlooked?
Probably was.
Okay. Yeah, so I will be in your office tomorrow morning.
Somebody will.
No, I said I will be in your office.
He said he
tomorrow
will be.
To talk to you.
He's looking to tutor.
All right.
Thanks,
Can
Earl.
we move on to number 2 then?
Thanks, Earl.
12? What number?
Number 2.
Oh,
Go to number 3. Okay. Mr. Stordahl's being
what are you,
generous.
what are you, chopped liver?
Okay, move on to number 3, advocate for rights of persons with disabilities. We have Mr. Mohamed here.
Okay. Yep, so that is on and ready to go. You can adjust it how it works for you. And you can use this. And then just slide that down to everything. Sorry.
Good evening, all. My name is Mohamed. I live at 1800 5th Avenue Northwest, and I'm the Imam and Director of East Grand Forks Islamic Center at 1500 5th Avenue Northwest, where Liberty Lane used to be at. I'm here today to talk about an incident that happened to me, and it so happens that when the incident happened to me, what a coincidence, is the same month the ADA was passed. So, but before I say my statements, I want to put out disclaimers. The first thing is I'm not bitter, because that's not what the beautiful religion that I practice teaches me. And the second thing is that for me not to capitalize on this opportunity, it will be a disservice to civil rights and disability rights advocates who fought tirelessly and gave out their sacrifice and energy. For me to have the opportunity today to sit here in rural Minnesota in a small town, East Grand Forks, in a white-dominated city council, to be able to speak up for the rights of persons with disabilities. That's one of the reasons why I'm speaking up. And the second reason why I'm speaking up is that I would like to first take this opportunity as a learning moment for myself and a teaching moment to the public. So the incident happened to me about 2 to 3 weeks ago. It was a hot day, so I just pulled out to Dairy Queen, East Grand Forks. So I pull out to the drive-thru, and I tell the lady at the drive-thru to read the print for me, because I'm not able to read standard print because I'm legally blind. And she responded by saying, "What are you doing driving?" I was like, I kept it cool because my Prophet Mohammed teaches me to stay calm and not get angry. So I just kept it cool, and she mumbled some words, and I pulled up to the window. I said, "FYI, people who are visually impaired can still drive in Minnesota legally." And she said, "Not in America." And I responded, I said, "Am I in Morse?" "Definitely I'm in America." So I just kept calm, and she said, "Oh, I'm not going to read it to you. Go ahead and learn how to read." So I just said, I have 2 options. Either I can go mad at her or angry, or use this opportunity as I said, a learning moment and a teaching moment. So I just pulled out and went out my way, went home. And since I have a large following on Facebook, I put out a nice incident report and to show people that disability discrimination is still active in America. So to point out that I would like to also point out that I sit on the State Services for the Blind Council for Minnesota. It's a federally funded program, but administered by individual states. And what they do is they help people who are visually impaired or legally blind live an independent life, whether it be they help them with education, school, and mainstream life. The reason why I would like to capitalize on this opportunity again is that yesterday, as we all should know, yesterday was the 31st anniversary of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. It was passed on July 29th, 1990, and it was signed into law by former President George H.W. Bush. So to take this opportunity, I would like to first, like I said, take it as a learning moment for myself and a teaching moment for the public. The ADA, since I'm not able to read the board out, I'll use my computer to read from here. But I'll pull up for the public to see. So the ADA is a civil rights legislature which prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability for persons with disabilities. It guarantees that persons with disabilities have equal access to employment, education, and mainstream American life. Like I said earlier, it was signed into law by President Bush in July 26, 1990, so it's 31 years old and one day by today. The ADA did not come into fruition easily. There was obstacles on the road, just like the civil rights had obstacles on the way. As civil rights advocates, humanitarian people, and individuals advocated for the passing of the ADA. Prominent groups such as the Independent Living Movement were instrumental in paving the way for the passing of the ADA. Other pieces of legislatures preceded the ADA, such as the Rehabilitation Act of 1975 and the Individual Disabilities Education Act idea. There were a lot of people helped in bringing the ADA into fruition and into a law. But since we can't mention everybody, I'll just mention few prominent figures. The first one that comes to mind is Justin Dirt, formerly known as the father of the ADA. Over the board. That's a little bit biography of him, when he was born and when he died. And next is a picture of Justin Dirt. He was a big advocate for persons with disabilities. And it happened that when he traveled to Japan and he saw how people with disabilities were treated, he came back and made this his life mission until he was able to pass the ADA. And he married his wife from Japan. The next person is Johnny Lacy. She was born 1937 and died 2010. She was a supporter of independent living movement, advocated for the disability rights of black women. And she was instrumental in changing the disability narrative within the African American community and the wider community. She ran an organization called Community Resource for Independent Living. And that's her picture. Last but not least, how can we forget Ed Roberts? He was born January 23rd, 1939, and he died in 1999. He is the father of the independent living movement, the first wheelchair user. Oh, sorry. He was the first wheelchair user student to attend University of California, Berkeley, and he advocated for the rights of people with disabilities to live an independent life. And he was very known for advocating for person-centered approach, meaning you put the person's needs first before the disability. And that's a picture of Ed Roberts. He is very famous for saying that all of us living in this world are two types: the disabled and the yet to be disabled. The ADA has 4 titles. The first title is it deals with employment. It makes sure that persons with disabilities are not discriminated against when it comes to the hiring process, interviewing, on the job performance, and it guarantees that they get reasonable accommodations. Computer's playing with me. Anyway, I'll just continue from here. Yeah, the second title deals with and requires that public entities, such as state and local governments, provide reasonable accommodations to persons with disabilities who are seeking their services. And the third is that it protects public accommodations such as private restaurants, hotels that are open to the public. They are required to provide service accommodations for persons with disabilities. And lastly, the fourth title of the ADA is that it's the telecommunication. It ensures that persons who are deaf or hard of hearing get relay services. And the last section is a link when the ADA was being signed into law. I'm not going to play that. Maybe you can play it at home. It's when the President Bush actually signed it into law, and it was a very historic day moment. And one of the statements he said is that today the giant walls of barriers have been dismantled. I would like to say that the ADA was just the beginning. Our work's not done until persons with disabilities have the access they need in order to live an independent life, just like everyone else. With that, I would like to also talk about facts about persons with disabilities. 61 million adults in America are disabled. And that's 26% of U.S. adults have some form of disability. If recognized as such, persons with disabilities will be the largest minority in the United States. 52% of adults of working age with disabilities are employed, compared to the general public of 82%. That's a big gap of about 30% almost. Now I would like to mention some facts and myths about the ADA. The first one I would like to mention is that a myth is people have, or companies have, is that the ADA forces companies to hire unqualified applicants, which is not the truth. But the fact is the ADA does not give unqualified persons with disabilities a privilege or a preference when it comes to hiring. All it does is it offers a leveling ground, so that way they can apply and get hired on. And another myth I would like to mention is that the ADA gives a special privilege to persons with disabilities called reasonable accommodations. In fact, reasonable accommodation is not a privilege, but rather it's a leveling tool for persons with disabilities. Finally, what can you do? What can I do? First thing we could do is we can change our bias and the stereotypes about persons with disabilities. And I would like to point out that the actions of majority of people, of us in America, is just a reflection of each individual's action. So if you see the society being discriminative or having biases towards persons with disabilities, just to take a pause time and reflect on who you are and what you're doing as your part. Second, I would like to advise myself and everyone else to be an advocate and to speak for the rights of persons with disabilities. And third, last but not least, refer to persons with disabilities using first-person language. Call the person by their identity, but not with the disability. Example: if a person is deaf, if a person is blind, you should say a person who is blind instead of saying a blind person. Or a person who is deaf, say a person who is deaf. Although the deaf community has a different terminology, they prefer to be called deaf. What we all can do is educate ourselves and educate the public. And also on a side note, I wanted to point out when the lady said the store owner, I was surprised to find out that she was actually the store owner. When I said, "Can I speak to your manager?" She said, "I'm the store owner." That indicates that companies are not getting the right education when it comes to hiring or accommodating persons with disabilities. And when she said, "Not in America," that's an implied statement that I'm not from here. But thank God I don't need anybody's validation to know that I belong here. So that's a side topic, but for a different day. To close out the statement, I would like to say that just like Ed Roberts says, there are two people in this world: the disabled and the yet to be disabled. And our work is not done until the artificial walls of barriers imposed on persons with disabilities are completely dismantled. And to close up, I'd like to say, God bless the entire world. God bless the United States of America. God bless Minnesota. And above all, God bless East Grand Forks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Back up to number 2, Mr. Stordahl. Consider Highway 220 frontage road repair.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the area we're talking about is just south of 23rd Street. It's on the west frontage road of Highway 220. It's just in some disrepair. Typically, we replace concrete with concrete, but we have overlaid some concrete in some pretty rough areas, and it's worked out pretty well. This one isn't that rough. It needs a little bit of leveling in the center. The curb and gutter is pretty bad on the west side of the street. So we would replace some curb and gutter first, and parts of the approach coming into the first business, and then come through and overlay with asphalt. We feel this is a good spot to do it again, just because there's not a lot of separation in the cracking and stuff like that. It's a fairly flat road. So we got a couple estimates. One is from Op Construction, another from R.J. Zavril and Sons, and we would use the funds from our street reconstruction budget to cover the project. My recommendation is to award the project to R.J. Zavril and Sons for $34,739.50. Are there any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Stordahl? Mr. Helms?
Thank you, Mr. President. Jason, I know it's something cheaper than what the asphalt.
Yep.
But there's only about probably 6 panels there that really need to be repaired. I'm a little bit concerned about the traffic up there on that part with the trucks and stuff. Are we just putting a patch here by using asphalt? I
No.
just think that we should be, I guess I feel we should put concrete back in there just because it's.
I guess we felt that this was a more cost-effective option. There are a lot of trucks on the frontage road out in the industrial park out there. And we had an area there that was very separated, poor soils and very wet. And we overlaid that a few years ago, wondering what was going to happen with that. And it held up really good. MnDOT uses this strategy as well when they have a good hard base underneath to overlay it with asphalt, and it holds up well in a lot of those spots. So our rationale was it would be a lot cheaper to do it this way, and it would be a good area to try right there. Being that it held up so well in the industrial park where it was such poor conditions. So there are, like you say, about 6 or 7 panels that are pretty bad, but there is a lot of surface cracking as well. And once water gets underneath that, then the subgrade starts deteriorating. And it's kind of hard to crack fill when there's, that many, like just small surface cracks on there. So that was kind of our justification. It just costs so much more to put in the concrete.
So are you going to put an overlay all the way up to 23rd then?
Yes.
So you'll cover up those cracks that you...
Yes. It'd be from basically 23rd Street south to the line on the map that you see there.
Well, if you're comfortable with it, I guess that, I'm okay, but I just thought, with the truck traffic and everything, the concrete would be a lifetime thing more than
Yeah.
it works in.
It's one of them things too sometimes where do you start and where do you stop?
Yeah.
And that area that we identified, we feel is just the worst area on there.
Yeah, it does need to be fixed, there's no doubt. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? See none, sir? Thank you so much.
Thank
Move on to number 4, requests for GIS services. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you, Council President, council members. As you're aware, the city has been looking at GIS services for a number of years. Currently, we're using the public open forum that the county has, and then we do some work on an open source. I myself have Esri ArcGIS that I use that has a lot of information that the county had taken layers from. However, at this point in time, we're kind of finding that the open source is a little clumsy, really hard to obtain maps and input information into, whereas Esri, the ArcGIS program is used by so many people throughout the nation, as well as a number of smaller communities within within Minnesota. So looking into the GIS services, one thing I wanted to look at was, mine is a desktop version. Opening it up to like a cloud source GIS, we think would be beneficial to the city because each department can use it, whether they're in the office, out in the field, or even at home if they need to access something. And so I contacted Esri myself, the office out of Minneapolis. I have a friend that works there, and he directed me towards a number of different companies that could put together a GIS program for us. When I contacted a number of these different companies, ProWest, I did also contact the city of Grand Forks. One of the things that they were up for was they would give us a proposal to put together a GIS program for the city and then teach us how to use it, but then continuing to update it and get the information that we need on it, they really felt that that wasn't something that they wanted to pursue. They kind of wanted to put it together and give it to us for us to do, and we just don't really have the technical staff that is kind of qualified in GIS to really get a good feel of adding the layers that we need. And so I did contact Mark Reinecke, who is out of Woodseth at the Alexandria office. I have seen his presentations. I've looked at it at a number of the planning conferences. I really thought that their work was well done. They're accommodating, and their prices were well, what I felt was within our budgeting. So I received a quote from them, and And the one thing that we had asked for was certain things that the county does not provide. The county does not show easements on it. The county does not show zoning. It doesn't show square footages of parcels. And it doesn't really give a good legal description that our Esri ArcGIS would. So he provided us with a project cost of $8,400 and then the online subscription. So once it's set up and running, the only true cost we would have would be the subscriptions, which I already have a creator license, so that would just be a continual charge that I'm already paying for. And then we have the option of field worker, which allows us to access and do some work and enter data. Let's say GPS coordinates for signs, those types of things. When we're out in the field, Jason can update manholes, those types of things. We can also do work orders as necessary. If there's something in the field that we would need to have done, we can mark that point on the map. His group can open it up with whatever sort of iPad, some sort of other pad, phones, etc., and they can put information right on that spot. So the subscriptions itself would just be something that as we get into it, whatever department wants, they can add that subscription to their specific department. And then if there are certain layers or things that we want, they would be able to do it at an hourly basis, which I think would be helpful. Because there are some things that the county wouldn't be able to put on a layer and show. So those would be things that we would ask them to do as needed. So we do receive all the county information for free, so that would be updated on a quarterly basis from WoodSeth, like your property changes, your deletions, your lot, adds, your lot removals, those types of things. So that's public information, that's free information, so we could get that and update the GIS. So I guess what I'm asking is we'd really like to enter into a contract with WoodSeth to begin this process, and hopefully as we get further on, we can open it up to the public so that it's accessible to assessors, appraisers, some of our construction and contracting companies, and then go from there. But we have two options right now to fund it. It is currently budgeted in the 2022 budget under the Community Growth Fund, or we do have funds available this year that we could use to do the GIS implementation, to get the program set up, and then each department could then pull from like a maintenance or a subscription line item to get that set up if we wanted to get it started this year and paid for and removed from next year's budget. But we'd really like to see this move forward. I think it would be a benefit to all the different departments. I visited with everyone, and I think they can see benefits moving forward for each department in the future. So
I think it's the right thing to do. I think we need to move forward with it. I think it's going to be a tool that can be, once we get started using it, you're going to find more things you can do with it, and I think it's going to be beneficial for all our departments. So I'm in favor of it. So I'm not sure what anybody else has any. Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. President. What you said is budgeted for 22, it's proposed.
Proposed.
Okay.
It's in the budget, I should say.
Kind of gone through this before.
Hey, you missed that last meeting.
Yeah.
Again, like Mr. Olson said, this is an important tool for our city. I've been advocating for GIS upgrades for quite a while. In fact, I open up the city's GIS site every time I come to a meeting because it is a great wealth of information. It's like you said, it's a bit clumsy. Is this intended to be then the forward-facing GIS module for the city then? Mm-hmm. Will it be a standalone site, or will it be incorporated into our webpage?
It would eventually be incorporated into our webpage.
So I guess, I'll pick on Reid a little bit, but I like what the Park and Recs does with their EGF Park and Rec website, but it drives me nuts that it's a separate site from our website. I don't want to see, I won't be in support of something that further separates all of our spots. So what I want to do is, join all of our information in one place. That's the goal.
And I don't know how it would be any different than how the county has all of their information on the county's website, and
Right.
then they
And I
have
just-
that link to
I
the.
just want to make sure
yeah.
that we're not going to say, okay, we'll use WIDSETH, and then it goes to a certain webpage, and it's.
No,
its
no,
own
it wouldn't,
separate-
the webpage or the cloud wouldn't be through WIDSETH.
Okay,
so.
currently, then we have a couple of three different GIS systems that the city's using, whether it's yours, Jason's group is using one, Water and Light has its own. Is this going to be the only one, or have we talked with Water and Light to see what they want to do?
Water and Light has concerns with safety or security of that access. To me, with Esri, as you are aware, it can open up and show you only what it wants you to see. So they can privatize any layer that they want to, and I have been in touch with Keith Mickelseth, and he's very interested in it and wants to see, he wants to obtain possibly a viewer license so he can see what's all on that and then go from there. I do know right now when Water and Light needs to access questions on easements and right-of-way and things like that, we have to pull out the old paper plat and look through it. And so from this standpoint, this will be extremely beneficial to them. Plus, all of the utilities currently are, the city owns the rights to where those are located.
Right, but I know part of Water and Light's workflow involves them being in the field recording, whatever, it's, curb stops or whatever. So they're actively doing this right now. So I just want to make sure, if this is going to be what we do, is it a beneficial conversation to have? Is, can we or should we or will we demand or suggest that we put all this together still? And what does that workflow look like on the back end? Because like I said, obviously there's the front-facing thing that is hugely beneficial, but if you can't get it to work with what you're going to want to have people in the field recording and making sure that this is seamless or whatever. So, and then do we have, if we do this, I would say that we should have some understanding of what our goals are, and I don't know, some sort of policy about what we're putting on, or is the council going to be obliged to know every layer, or is it just going to be up to the various departments what gets broadcast out, or what layers we're going to put on there? Or is that going to be?
Well, right now, it would only be open to staff.
But it's, the
So
point is,
as you're, well, to me, everything that I have in my ArcGIS is public information.
Right.
And so right now, in terms of a policy, it's all, anything that I have on my ArcGIS minus, like I have zoning on mine, I have square footage on mine, and I would have easements on mine. All of my other information is publicly obtained from the county. And so in terms of access, I don't need access to Jason's stormwater maintenance or where his manholes and things like that are. He would have the ability, because he's going to get a field worker's license, he would have the ability to turn off whatever layers he wants to and make them private and only viewable to his staff.
but like I said, I just see this as a great tool, and I think as different departments, if you go in other cities and other communities, there's fire departments that are using GIS to convey information to, there's police departments that are talking about, crime, different crime regions, different things like that. It's amazing what people are doing with GIS platform. I just want to make sure that we know what's going out there and that we don't just.
If I can interject in that, I don't know that we're really to that point yet. We're just getting kind of the basics, anything that would be public information out there right now yet. I guess we haven't really gotten into the full build out yet for like crime statistics and things. I think that's something that we definitely can do, but I think that's down the road, and we'll probably would take a look at maybe what industry standard is at that particular time for what we would put out public and what we want.
And in terms of layers and maps and things like that, we're still, what Jason or Steve provide, their contractors and things like that, again, are still, prevalent to whatever project they're doing. And so they're currently giving it out to them in a paper format. I don't think they would be giving them access to our cloud system. They would just be providing them a map, which would be, something you would give out publicly or place in a bid packet or something similar to that anyways, so. And as we move forward, like he said, as we get it ready to open to the public, that would be something that we would want to set policy with and, work with Ron to see what would be published, what people would have access to, so.
And I think we take our lead from the league. I mean, this isn't anything new. I mean, as far as we go back to water and light, I know they looked at it, but it's really kind of up to them how they want to participate and at what level. But we definitely want them to be a part of it. But we just haven't heard back from them yet, really at what level they want to participate.
Yeah, at this point, all I know is they'd like to obtain a viewer license for the $100, so.
And then the ongoing training, is that, did I hear that's WIDSET that does
Yes.
that?
Yep.
So as we need, say, Jason wants to have a couple guys go down and learn how to.
Well, and again, once they get this set up, they're actually going to come up and sit down with staff and do the training. So that initial training is included in that price.
The thing with Esri is that a lot of that stuff is accessible on YouTube. There's webinars, there's a lot of information that they can obtain to help them set layers and stuff like that they could do from their office without having to go down to Alexandria and receive physical training, so.
Anything else, Mr. Demers?
No, just, like I said, I think it's a great tool. But like websites or everything, it's only as good as the content that's put into it, so we need to have commitment and training.
I know this is something that staff has wanted for a long time.
Anybody else have anything? All right, thank you, man.
So then I guess my question is should we leave it in the proposed budget for 2022, or should we just move forward in 2021 and see if we can fit it in our current line items, get it moving?
If you can get it done this year, I think get it done.
Get it done? Okay.
That's my personal thing.
Thank you so much.
Number 5, discussion regarding off-road vehicle concerns on Greenway system. Reid.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. Vehicle concerns in the Greenway, this kind of came to light, or a little bit more to light, in the last few weeks as we started talking with residents in the Maplewood edition. But I certainly don't want to pass over the greater issue it is in our entire Greenway system. I think it's one, at least on a staff level, that we've been receiving complaints on and talking about as staff, as at Park and Rec Commission meetings and meetings with Mr. Hedlund and I for quite some time. Safely for most of this year. I have some emails going back to even into February that pedestrian users are taking pictures and sending complaints of vehicles driving at high rates of speed in the Greenway. And so there's a number of things included in the packet tonight that timed out really well to be included that I think are ways that we can help to mitigate some of the vehicle traffic that's happening within the system. You'll recall even that in 2018, we applied for a grant funding through the Red Lake River Corridor for legacy dollars to put some vehicle barriers, boulders, bollard signage out in the Greenway, specifically in that space that's applicable to that grant, the Red Lake River side. So I renewed some of the information in that grant cycle. We're in a phase this summer into the end of June next year that the funding is finally available to us. All of the DNR contracts are signed and we can start working on putting things in place actually. So there is some money available to help mitigate it at this point. Mr. Galstead has worked on an ordinance that has been discussed at some council meetings in recent years that would kind of mirror the ordinance that Grand Forks has in place. I think that it would be very strong of us at this point as a city to pass that ordinance and give the police department another tool to enforcement when they come across vehicles or take calls and complaints on vehicles operating within the Greenway. So I think at this point, I would say that open to any comments or thoughts that any of you have, if there's any areas in town that should receive a little bit more specific signage, specific vehicle barriers that we think we have a bigger issue to focus on. But I would really encourage as a great first step that we would work on getting that ordinance passed and use that as a tool for public information to start getting the word out to people that we are going to start looking at ways to help limit or slow down and ultimately stop the off-road vehicle traffic within the Greenway.
So with this, so I just have a question on the ordinance. With that ordinance, would we have to designate, or would we just say the whole Greenway? I mean, no matter where it's at in the city. Is that what the gist of it is? We wouldn't have to say, okay, we got these parameters, and we don't have to go that far?
No, the Greenway ordinance actually covers the entire Greenway, and there's going to be an exhibit that's attached that shows our Greenway.
Right, okay, so that's what I mean, not to say between this place. Okay.
Try to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, that's just want to make sure. Is $1,000 enough? No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, sir. I question the 5 o'clock a.m. till 11 p.m. closure after 11 p.m. I don't like that. What's the big deal?
What don't you like about it?
Yeah, I don't. Why 11 o'clock? Why is it? Why have a restriction on time?
Yeah, it's a good question. Really, and where that Mr. Galstead and I talked about that too. We referred to back when the Greenway was organized in 2005 as the most recent rules that the city of East Grand Forks passed, and those are the hours that are listed in that. They mirror the hours that are in the Grand Forks Greenway ordinance. Our city park hours are actually even earlier than that. In the city code, our parks open at 8 a.m. and close at 9 p.m. So even the Greenway is a little longer hours than that. But that really, Mr. Johnson, to your question, we use those hours because that's what we've been using in our rules since the Greenway was first formed.
I think it has something to do with also daylight. I think it also has something to do with daylight hours in the summer when most of the time it's going to be used, because typically you're going to have 5 o'clock to 11 o'clock, then it's going to be daylight hours. And then if you're going to be down there any time after that, it's really hard to enforce and to see what's going on. So that's another reason that it was 5 to 11.
Mr. Edlin, you want to add something?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to comment that the ordinance, if we can get that in place, it really will make it easier for us to enforce. It just removes one hurdle that we run into every time we get a complaint now. It doesn't make it perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There's still issues of, can we respond quick enough? Do we have the ability to respond? Along those fronts, you will see in my budget request that for 2022, a request to purchase a UTV. So we would be able to at least occasionally do some active patrol in that area and maybe actually be able to catch some people and, have a little bit of a deterrent effect that we really don't have a very good ability to do right now. I guess we can talk about that more another day, but that's kind of related to the last topic of the night. So just want to really, I mean, we've looked at the ordinance before. The rules are there. The ordinance largely mimics the rules, but the rules are, there's not much backbone behind them, and they're very difficult to enforce.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not unopposed to the 5 to 11. The only thing is I would like to maybe see some carve-outs. Maybe the boat ramp might be an area where people would use after 11. I know people fish at night on the Riv. I don't know if that could be a carve-out, that area. And then I don't know if there's certain areas of the trail that you could carve out and say, like, if there's an area that's like I don't know, something through downtown area that people can walk on, back to the park, to the restaurants and all that kind of stuff, if that would be considered open, later till 2:30 or something, till the bars close or something, like allow people to walk on there back and forth somewhere. I don't know. But I don't see you going out writing a lot of tickets unless people are misbehaving.
No, in all reality, that's a portion of this that would probably be very rarely enforced.
But the nice thing is
actively
if
creating
it's,
problems.
If it's 11 o'clock at night and kids are running around or doing, I guess it doesn't have to be kids, sorry. It can be anybody. If it's running around there, it gives you a reason to say, get out of here, too. So.
Just a comment or an observation, I guess. Until we went through this process, I didn't realize that there were hours on the Greenway. I've been out running on the Greenway outside of those hours. Take it. Say anything. I think it's just maybe it's probably nice to have just in case somebody is causing trouble out there. You can say, it's closed. You can do that. But if you're out there, running at night because it's cooler or in the morning, I don't know that they would.
Like I said, I think it's specific. If you just carve out, like, maybe it's just if someone's in transit on the trails, like, they can be there anytime, but there's no just hanging out after or outside of those hours or something.
That's certainly an area, law enforcement officers in our country are allowed discretion, and that's certainly an area that I would, recommend they use them. If you've got a person that's, doing something that's not causing an issue, like, for example, the running on the trails or something like that, or down at the boat ramp, I personally would have zero issue with that, and I would imagine most of you would not have an issue with that either, and I guess I would certainly, if we passed this, that'd be a discussion we would have with our staff, and, let's look at, that's going to be something you enforce when the people are creating a problem.
When labor negotiations are coming up.
I think if we don't have the parameters in here, I think you're leaving it open to, as you said, in transit, or if there's a time. I think we have to have the parameters in there if we're going to enforce something. Because I don't think you can, I think it's got to be in there. And I understand your point, but I think it's,
well, Mr. President, the next thing that's going to come up on the agenda is they want extra money from the citizens for the Greenway. Well, like some people work late, they like to go out and use it at certain different, I know it's reinforced, the enforcement thing. If there's somebody out there on a bicycle, big deal. But I mean, if we're going to have an enforcement where it's closed, well, I don't want to. Why would I want to improve it? Why would I want to give extra money to it when I can't use it?
Personally, I'm not that worried about the hours. I think, as Mr. Huttunen stated, that was part of the rules. They just kind of copied that over. It mimics the Grand Forks ordinance, so they're just trying to stay consistent on both sides of the river. But for me personally, I'm not overly concerned about the hours. But
President, the activity would really change. If you were down there fishing with your two sons in the daylight hours, and now it's after dark, it's between 11 and midnight or later, that's a whole different setup. Typically, that's a different activity. It's a change in the use of the Greenway. And whether it's 11 or whether it's 12, I think Hank Tweeten was right, nothing good happens after midnight in the Greenway. So I think it's perfectly fine to have those hours listed. And really, we're not talking about preventing someone from using it. You're really trying to give our police some teeth to have the probable cause to break up something happening down there after those hours. And I think it's appropriate.
Mr. Helms first.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions, and one of them is, and because I've never been down there behind Maplewood there, is my understanding the homeowners own all the way to the river?
Yep.
Correctly? Do they mow that down there and stuff too? I mean, I've never been back there. Does it get mowed, or is it just?
To that, I will say the city mows the levee itself, and then an access area on the wet side of the levee also. That's mowed not every week, but it's mowed probably every 2 to 3 weeks, so it's kept knocked down. And then there's kind of a wild area actually beyond the levee to the river where it's kind of, reverted to just wild area. Usually they'll have a little bit of something they mow, maybe to get down to the water's edge if they like to have a fire down there or something, but mostly it's just a wild strip that's reverted to natural grasses and stuff, much like it's happened in all the rest of the Greenway. It really looks like the whole Greenway, other than there's no rec trail through there. Yep.
Okay, I didn't know. I don't want to get in trouble for walking down there, so. But the other thing that I want to bring up is that the signage and talking about the river and the Greenway and down at the Red Lake Dam. I went across the Louis Murray Bridge one day, and I looked down there, and there was a bunch of kids out on the rocks on the dam playing. And then there was somebody on the south side of that dam that had pulled their side-by-side, actually pulled it right down on the rocks off of the side of the deal. And I don't know if anybody else seen that or not, but is there any kind of signage or anything there? I almost called you guys, and I thought, well, I kind of just went on by, but I thought that was pretty. Is there any kind of signage down there or anything that says that, dangerous and shouldn't be out on these rocks or anything like that? Or do we need anything, or is that... It's just something I seen, and I thought, God, that just looks horrible.
Normal water conditions, I think most people wouldn't be able to go out there. I think it's just because the water is so extremely low right now. It probably makes it more accessible than usual. As far as the vehicle being down there, unfortunately, that's an area that quite often has people pull their, I've seen UTVs at times, more often than not, it's just somebody's pickup truck that they pull down there, in most cases, just to go fishing, and they're easier access than walking down. But I think the general consensus from people with, for trying to take care of the Greenway properly is that they would prefer people walked.
Anything else, sir?
No, that's it.
Mr. Vedder?
Thank you, Mr. President. Concerning the ordinance, I'm in favor of the ordinance, except under paragraph or section 90.08 for public safety, number A, limits the custody, possession, and control within the Greenway of any dangerous weapon. There should be an exception there for those with a concealed carry permit. A lot of people are walking down there and concerned for their safety, and they carry their weapons with them from time to time. I'd hate to see them get into trouble because of this ordinance. So if that change could be made, I'd appreciate it. Second, with access, my concern is around the water tower, and there's a lot of vehicles driving back there. I know that there's a lot of people that use that access down there to get to the river and fish or swim or what have you. I would like to see some sort of a gate, at least on the residential side. And if we do bollards or boulders or something on the gravel road on the south end there, to limit it to walking, bikes. I don't know if you want ATVs back in that area, but there should be at least a gate on the residential side on the up and over to limit so that people aren't driving out into the neighborhood there. If they would drive back there, they'd have to go out on the south end if we want to keep it open for that purpose. They wouldn't be able to exit out into the neighborhood. Those are my concerns.
Mr. Larson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I'm in favor of the ordinance. I guess if there was a downside to it, it could limit some people enjoying our Greenway because, they love side-by-sides. That's how they've always fished, and now we're saying you can't do what you've done in the past. So while I am certainly in favor of this, I think we need to continue to find other ways for convenient parking in the right spots, promoting fishing and other activities down there along the river so that we don't lose this amenity for a certain number of people that use it the way that they shouldn't be using it. just in general. So that's my overall comment, but I think it's a great idea.
That's everything. Reid, you had something to follow up on or anything?
No, I'm okay. Thanks.
Anything else? Okay. Move on to the next one. A request to consider increased Greenway maintenance fee.
Okay, thank you again, Mr. President. Earlier today, I did send out an email with an updated table. I don't know if any of you have seen that in your email. If not, I have paper copies I can send around as well. I had an error in the table that I sent, so I'll just send all those your direction. We should be good. So I think, as we are all aware, the Greenway maintenance fund that we have in place right now, we pay $1 a month on our utility bills through Water and Light. And in the last couple of rounds of overlays we've done on the trail system, we've overspent that account into a negative balance, and used the next couple of years following to have our general fund essentially repay that account to get it back to even. Or I'm sorry, not the general fund, but the utility fund. And so at some Park and Rec Commission meetings for the last number of months, we've been looking at some proposed fee increases to this account to try to get the balance back to a place where we think we can get our trail overlay system back on schedule again. So some of the tables that I included, the first one being just to show you where we'd be at if we left our utility billing at $1 a month right now. I'm using an inflation table that was provided to me by Mr. Emery, and I think the MPO uses it in some of their budget forecasting for road improvements. But largely looking at, how much of our trail system can we overlay at the current $1 a month, and you can see that we're close to probably the year 2050 or beyond if we stay at that current revenue amount before we'd have the funds necessary to overlay even the original trail system that was installed from the years 2000 to 2005. So at that rate, some of those trails potentially could be 40 plus years old before they'd ever have any asphalt overlay work done on them. So I really do think that that's great evidence that we need to address our fund in some way. I have proposed, the next table proposed an increase to the fee to $2 a month. So a $1 a month increase. And then that would be for the year 2022. And then a 5% annual increase each year after through the year 2032. And that increase, a 5% annual increase, roughly by the time we got to 2032, our monthly utility billing would be about $3.26 a month. At that rate, I believe we would be able to have the entire trail system, original trail system, overlaid by the year 2031. So we're still then, remember, some trails will be 26 years old by the time they get a chance to get overlaid for the first time at that forecasting. We'd like for the trail system to be overlaid on probably a 10 to 15 year schedule, depending upon the conditions of how close it is to the river, how much the trail system moves, the cracking it has. It's really difficult to place an exact year, one year after another, which trail is going to need the next overlay, because especially the trail locations that are more near the river and have water sit on them for longer in spring flood events seem to decay a lot faster than the higher trails. The asphalt really dries out quick and gets a lot of cracking. So that was our initial shot at a proposed increase. The question was brought up yesterday at our department head meeting, what it would look like if we just increased the fee right now to $3 a month and left it there for the same next 10 years. And so I've also included that table. That's in the printout that I gave you for the meeting today of what that would look like. And at that rate, we'd accelerate the repaving schedule by a couple of years. We'd be able to really finish the initial install overlay by 2029, and at that time then by 2031 be able to start refreshing trails that were first overlaid hypothetically in 2015 and moving on. So we'd be closer to a 15-year overlay schedule by that point. So really just, I think tonight, probably looking for some initial reaction and discussion to this. And if there's any sense of any alterations or edits you'd like to see, and trying to incorporate it into the bigger budget conversation for this fund. And Karla, just correct me if I'm wrong, I'm almost, well, I think I'm certain that this fund is not tied into the general fund at all. It's a separate revenue account aside from the general fund and the general budget.
I know you're going to ask a question, but I thought Miss Karla was going to, I didn't hear if she responded or not, so that's why I was looking that way. Sorry. Wasn't looking at you,
I just
Mark.
shook my head at him.
I wasn't looking at you, Mark.
Because I knew he wouldn't hear me because I was sitting back there. But yes, it is a special revenue fund, so it is not part of the general fund. So the money that goes in there stays in that fund. If it goes in the hole, then the general fund does have to basically cover that. But I know other projects we've done that we've approved that, and then it recoups itself in the next year or two.
Okay, so anybody have any questions? Mr. Vetter.
Thank you, Mr. President. As everyone well knows, I'm against fees on our water and light bill. We approved a stormwater fee increase. We approved a sanitary sewer fee increase. Now we're looking at the maintenance fee for our greenways. This is one of those fees that I don't think should be on our water and light bill. We should be budgeting for it in our budget process and transferring the money over from the general fund into the special fund on an annual basis to cover those expenses. So I'm going to be against this and would propose that we put it down to zero. And as we go through our 2022 budget, we look at how much we want to transfer over to the Greenway Maintenance Fund and budget for it that way. Thank you.
So I think if you did the $2 one, you're looking at almost 2% mill levy, correct? Close to it. So I mean, it's 94,600. Just to give you an idea.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah, so. Mr. Larson?
Yeah, I'm in favor of the $2 with the 5% escalation factor. You know, I think that 10 years is probably the right date for a sunset clause, more or less, and at that point, who's ever on the council can elect and vote to continue it in place or change it at that point. But I think that doubling it is enough of a initial jump, and then let's let compounding interest work in our favor for 10 years.
Fair.
Yep, I support that as well. And I also appreciate the proactive approach that you are taking. It was pretty clear that we were starting to see a little deferred maintenance on our trails here and there. Some cracks are starting to open up, and then when the water gets in and you lose your base underneath there. And so our ability to be a little more timely, I think, with maintenance is going to preserve that asset for the long term. And so to again, create a fund that's actually solvent, that can do timely maintenance is really important. And I would support it happening as proposed with the $1 and then a percentage going out thereafter. 5% is probably as good as any. 3% would be fine with me also, but it wouldn't achieve our goal quite as quickly. It gets a little closer to the rate of inflation at 3, or what it's been in the last several years. So I'm fine with either of those, the $1 with some adjustment, so you don't have to revisit it every single year to tweak it. Just put it in place and let it ride.
Anybody else have anything to add? I think I'm fine with the $2 and the 5% myself too. So.
Mr.
Demers.
Thank you. I just, that the original intent of the fee was to do exactly this. We started with $1 that we figured we could do some maintenance. We knew that it would need to be adjusted going forward, and I'm glad we're revisiting it. To Clarence's point, I in some ways agree, because the original thought was we were going to try to just do it as part of the budget process, but at that time, there was zero chance that we were going to get any additional revenue in our budget. It just wasn't going to happen. This was the only way that you were going to be able to raise the revenue needed to do it, because of politics, whatever. Same issue is with streetlights, different things like that. So I guess if the council is interested in looking at putting it back into a budget, I would be in favor of looking at doing that too. I think there is some argument that it's a little bit regressive in the fact that every person, whether you live in a $50,000 thing or you live in a $300 a month apartment, or if you have a meter, you get $1 fee or whatever. And no, everybody, well, it's only $1, it's only $2, but it is a little bit, it's more regressive definitely than our property taxes, which can be a little bit regressive as well. But all these things compounding though does have some regression to it, and I think we should be cognizant of that. If that's not the case, I'm very much in favor of increasing that amount by whichever means we need. I don't know if 10 years is the right sunset. I typically prefer mandating review more often. I think 5 years is plenty, just because you never know what changes. For the only reason is we may add miles, we may add whatever. I think we should review it more often than not, but I'm not opposed to 10 either, but thank you.
Mr. Vedder? Thank you. None of us were here back when our greenways weren't on the council. We were probably all here when the greenways were built, but it seems that I've got something stuck in my head, and maybe Karla or Mr. Murphy might have to do some research, but it seemed like there was something put in place back then that when certain properties were sold, that money was going to go into our Greenway maintenance fund. And I might be wrong, but I just seemed to recollect something along those lines. And so if Karla or Mr. Murphy could do some research and see if I'm just wet behind the ears and don't know what I'm talking about, or if there was something actually there, I'd appreciate it.
I think we looked at that, even like with Scott and Megan, you might remember,
Yeah.
and we didn't find anything on that.
Okay.
But was it so like the residential properties, like the lots that the city was selling, or?
It was lots,
Okay.
city lots.
Yeah, no, I think we looked that up and didn't find anything on it because, and the other thing is that home loan, the home fund, has been in the hole many years also, so there isn't really any money there.
And I know Mr. Pakshavinsky was around back then, and I always relied on him, and he seemed to have something along those lines too. So maybe just reaching out to him to see if there was something that we're missing.
I can do that tomorrow morning. I'll call Mike.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Any consensus so far right now, it's $2 and 5%. Alrighty, we'll move on to the next one. Discussion on rural childcare innovation program. Mr. Gorte, Ms. Anderson.
After the last work session, we became aware, thank you, I'm sorry.
No problem.
After the last work session, we became aware that there was an opportunity to get assistance in looking at daycare. Daycare is an issue. We became aware there was an opportunity to get some resources into the community that would not require city dollars to participate in that, but to look at the daycare situation to see and create a strategy for how to do it. The application must be submitted before our next work session, so normally we'd have this a lot more fleshed out than what it is right now, but it's an idea. The EDA discussed it at its meeting last week, and they said we should try to proceed as quickly as we can to see if we can look into this. We would be talking, the group that we would be talking with would actually involve our current providers as well, and we would be looking to see, we know that there's over 100 slots that we are short in East Grand Forks. It would be a way to help to look at it. It's both a quality of life and economic development issue. Economic development in terms of we need to have workforce, and this is a way to make sure that there are people in the workforce who might otherwise have to stay at home. So we'd like to be able to proceed with this, file the application, and see if we can move forward and find a strategy for addressing the shortage. Karla, do you have anything you want to add?
Nope, you did it very well, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me have any questions for Mr. Gorte? I think it's a good idea to look into it. Would this be, and forgive me, anyway, I looked through this and maybe I missed it early enough, so I'm rereading it again here. Is this something that we burn through EDA and when not because of the aspects of any, how it's run? Or, I mean, that'd be my question of, excuse me.
Bless you.
For this to work, would it have to actually run through the ADA to make sure it's beneficial and there wouldn't have to be any requirements or any legalities that city would have to follow, EDA would not have to follow?
I would
think
see,
you'd want to make sure we know that.
I would see a report back to the EDA and a report back to the city council, because I can see both parties being involved. It's an interest of the EDA in particular because of the economic development and the quality of life issues. It's an issue for the city council because quality of life and workforce and support for our working community.
No, and I get that, and I just want to make sure how, if reading it and going through the research of it and applying for what is the best opportunity to maximize the program, would it be to make sure that it runs through which city or through EDA? That's all I want to make sure that you take a look at.
I think you mean the application, I believe, would come from the city of East Grand Forks with support of the EDA, because the city of East Grand Forks is basically the umbrella of the EDA anyway. Is that kind of what you're asking?
I think he's looking at which would be the best entity to work with for legal purposes as well as funding purposes, as opposed, whether it would be the city or the EDA to be the driving force, just like some of the EDA can provide different funding sources to businesses where the city can't. So I think that's the avenue. Oh, I'm sorry. You're good. I think that's the avenue that he's taking.
And I guess what this first thing is it's just, this is a group that would actually get the community together, do research on it, and see what the needs are. So there isn't any money coming from the EDA or the city at this time.
No, I understand that.
Right. So I think, when that time comes, then you can decide as a group how you want to handle it from there. So this is basically the research and data.
I think it's a to be determined question, because I'm not sure at this point that which entity would be serve better as the lead agency, lead organization on that.
I just want to make sure that if it moves forward and it comes to fruition and it's beneficial to the whole community, that we're making sure that we're not putting a lot of strings on the back end of it to make sure these people can use it. So
I think we agree with that.
Anybody else have any questions?
Sounds good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Review of the 22 election budget. Megan.
Try to keep this short. During the last election cycle, I tried to get as many alternate judges as possible, dealing with COVID, not knowing who was going to be sick. We have to staff polling places with a minimum of 4 people. I try to keep 5 because a lot of the times on election morning, I'll get phone calls, people are sick, kids are sick, can't make it, many different reasons. And this budget that I put together, I have 5 polling places with 5 judges at each and accounting for 10 alternate judges. This last time, I think I had 10 or 12. I called I used everybody. With everything that happened, I used everybody. So this accounts for training. The costs for it's about $10 for the online service or online training that they do. And I guess the biggest change that I would like to request is to give my election judges a $1 bump in pay. It's been 10 years since they received a bump in pay, and this would not only help with keeping maybe a few more, but also maybe attracting a few more people to be election judges. Any questions?
See none?
Perfect.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm not going to give you a chance. Number 9, request for direction on the 22 budget.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to be as quick as Megan, so if you have any questions, just ask me. No, I'm teasing. So I sent the general fund summary, revenue expenditures like we, budgeting tool that we use all the time. And I put in a 5% inflation for the levy, and then I put in what the department heads had given me. The only change since then, which we know is going to be fluid for many months now, is that we finally got the final certified balance for the LGA, and it did not go down, it actually went up.
Almost
So-
$1,300.
Yeah, so David said do not spend it all one place, but it was, went up. Yeah, so $1,269. So we were told that it was going to stay hopefully at least the same, so that's what we budgeted for. So if you look at the budget summary, it's at $479,822 with the change in the LGA to the negative. And then I also sent the tax rate comparison with the actual numbers from 2012 to the 2021 levy. Just as an example, so that, just because the levy is 5%, that does not mean that's what the property owners are paying. And I know most everybody is aware of that. We've hounded it to you enough, so. But we still want you to share that with you. So I guess we're looking for direction on, what percentage of a levy are you comfortable with? What percentage or what dollar amount are you comfortable with if there's a negative, since we have a fund balance, so that we can go back as department heads and try figure out what direction we should go. And David, you can add to that if you have anything.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add is that, with the revenue amount that we're looking at, we're still, pushing $500,000 short. Granted, we do have the fund balance, which is, in good shape now, and we can use some. We can talk about how we might want to utilize that. We could use it for like the projects like we're talking about, but we can go into that later. But I guess what I'm looking at is, if we are going to be adding some of the things that we had talked about and what the department heads would need. We put in the 5% just because that was in the past, but depending what the council would really wants to see in the future, we would be open to amending that even higher if we need to. So
To get it to zero would be about a 13% increase,
well, it looks, yeah. So,
as it is today.
Lucky 13.
So I guess, the only thing I will say, I guess I'll add is in the expenditures, there are some positions that are in there. I know we are looking at the rental inspection through the fire department. That is in there. There would be some potential revenue that position would generate. We're also looking, at I know the library board is bringing that forward. So we do have the positions in here as well. So just for full disclosure. So I always will take any feedback from the council that you may have.
I know the mayor has to leave here, so I'll let him go first.
I'll give you my 2 cents. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the good work so far going into the budgeting process. Gave us a great starting point. I sure do like keeping it around that 5% levy increase, which translates to our people historically in that 2 to 3% on an average property of an increase in their property tax. And if we can keep it down about that rate of inflation, it works quite well. And the reason we can say 5 and it shows up at 2 or 3 is we have community growth on a continual basis. So as the community grows, we get to spread that cost out across those new properties, and that's very helpful because that's where some of our added costs are coming from. And so I feel that's a good target as a good starting point. And with our reserves as they are, and we do always carry over a little more from the previous year than we expected. We don't know, of course, what 2021 will do as for bottom line excess versus a little bit of a negative. So for sure, I think in the bottom we can show a little bit of a negative, and plan to tap into the reserves that are again above what we've targeted. And yet I think we'll have to trim a little bit on the expense side to make it all fit together. So for my 2 cents, I like to see us top out around that 5 and then work our budget toward that, and then whatever little deficit or negative intentional spending of the reserve that we want to do. I think that's a good process.
Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we know, I know we don't know, but can we project what our 21 budget deficit / surplus is going to be?
Yes and no. I mean, you could buy a few, if you put a spending freeze in, but technically if they get a budget, they can use that budget till December 20th. So
Right, I guess the last 3 cycles for sure, we've come in considerably above what we've budgeted.
Well, I guess what I'll say is, I mean, we can project, we could do that, if current spending trends continue. And I guess I will say, a lot of times, sometimes like some of the capital stuff, and that will get bought at the end of the year. But I will say that I'm very proud of this group of department heads. They don't, at the end of the year, spend it, otherwise we'll lose it, kind of thing. I just don't see that happening.
Right, and I guess I would say that you should anticipate any capital that's budgeted, and just, wages and all that kind of stuff going through the end.
Karla, I don't know how much you want to get into this here too, but we might have some potentially, what could change some of it too is the recovery money,
Well, the recovery money is really, American Rescue Plan is really specific to infrastructure, which is not the general fund. So that really won't have anything to do with the general fund. But, for example, I don't believe many people are traveling like they have in the past. So those, I think last year we estimated we'd have to save $80,000 in traveling. I know we do have some, Nancy's going to get some numbers here in the next week or two, hopefully, for transit dollars, and we have about probably 30,000 that we were going to transfer in that, where in the past, we haven't done that for the last 2 years. So there's 130,000 right there of the swing in the budget between the actual.
And that's what I was going to say, is that we have a local match of about 130 with our operating, and then the fact that we have to purchase a bus. But I'm getting some clarification from FDA, because we do have ARP dollars that I think we can use.
I think they want you to go up to the thing.
Very much. I do have ARP funds that I'm trying to clarify, but typically we can use federal dollars to match our state funds as local funds, if that makes sense. So that would allow me to write a grant with our ARP dollars to remove the 130,000 that would be transferred into transit for our local match. So that would be some dollars right there. But I'm trying to get clarification for that. But that would already reduce it by a couple of mils just with those funds. So.
And I guess my point is as we seem like we come to this budget process, we try to scratch or whatever to get to this 5% just so we can break even and hold and we've, we built our fund balance up, and it seems like, okay, well, we're fine with where we're at, but now, and then we've even budgeted cuts, or using fund dollars, and our fund balance is still growing, so, I mean, I think we're getting to the point where our fund balance is too large.
And I guess I won't disagree with you on that aspect of it. I guess and I haven't talked with Karla about this, so hopefully she won't get too mad at me and yell at me too much tomorrow, but one of the things that I would think we could look at, or I would suggest we would take a look at with the fund balance on that, is that is built up there, is for using that for some things that we've been maybe neglecting. I mean, we could use it for, like, for example, I'm just going to throw this out as things like getting projects shovel ready.
Right.
Things like that.
Absolutely.
Could we look at using some of that to get ourselves more prepared for some of the things that we've been putting off? So.
Right, and I don't think you don't want to use your fund balance to do ongoing budget
You don't want to use it
No.
for things that are going to be coming on a year-to-year basis that you're going to have to, because then you have to double it up the next year. But if for more like one-time things, things or projects that we're looking at, I think we could maybe look at using some of that.
And that's basically what we've been doing with the capital. Because, the capital doesn't follow every year. Some departments do have some things that, they're looking for every year, but, some of the departments, like, fire hasn't every other year is when they've gotten something. So, and that's what we did last year, where, we cut back in the capital after we found out what year end was. We amended the budget in it was about May, and allowed to buy a police vehicle at the time. And that's something we could do again. We can do that again next year. We can do that every year if we like, just because of the unknown of where we are at the end of the year. And I know I didn't budget as much, for example, in the revenue for the campground, because, with Canada still being closed, we know revenue is down, and so we're trying to be a little cautious on that. So I think it was about 50,000 that we didn't put in. So.
And then there's things like overtime can still change it. I mean, overtime is down in public works because it's been dry. We haven't been doing we haven't been running the mowers and things like that. Our legal fees are up. We changed how we changed the contract. We would pay per hour rate, but then with COVID, it changed how the criminal processing works, and he's having to be there more. I mean, which was unanticipated. So legal's up. Some of the overtime is down, but.
Then we still have, winter for November and December too. So, it's.
And my point isn't trying to be accusatory. My point is just point out that we have, in the past, we've worked very hard to, and when I say we, I mean the citizens of East Grand Forks, because it's their dollars, their tax revenues that have done it, has built our reserve up to where it needs to be. But it just seems like even when we're coming in these last couple of budgets, when we're predicting either spending down or not, our levy or our fund balance keeps going up. And it's my view that at certain points, yes, we want to be cautious, we want to have insurance backup plans and all those types of things, but that money just sitting there is actually a detriment when it could be going out, being used. Money doesn't do, I'm going to argue with the mayor or something, because cash is king, right? But using it now is the benefit. These are the people that are paying for things. We need to use it for capital purchases, the projects that we need now. Especially if we're looking at inflation going up, like sitting in the bank, we're losing money if it's sitting there.
Well, I guess, and I don't want to speak for Karla, but I heard you're not opposed to that idea, but I think what we would be looking at is, and we don't need an answer from it tonight, because obviously it's, getting late here, and but I think what we'd want to start thinking about is what types of projects in funding, if we're going to do that, what would we want to use that money for? Could it be capital project? Could it be, Greenway improvements? Could it be, whatever? What could we use it for? The only thing I would say, I would recommend is that it not be something to spend down, a levy increase, for things that are ongoing. Sure. But more like one-time things, yeah.
And my just direction to staff as we go through this is going to be, a couple of things that I'm concerned about this cycle is going to be, how are our fees being generated, and what's going to be their use, and how are we justifying them? And then how are they contributing to the long-term fund that they're supposed to be going? So we should be having the same type of conversation that we're having with the trails and, what we've been talking about with sewer rates, with every fee that we have. Whether we want to do it all in this budget cycle, but it's something that we should be bringing up more often. Second thing is really starting to address, the depreciation on our capital assets, particularly our buildings, those type of things, our levy system. How are we strategizing for the replacement of these things, especially that we're, in about a 20-year outset from a lot of this stuff being new since the flood. We should really start, to your point about one-time fees or setting up, taking chunks and putting them in to depreciation or into budget. I know at Water and Light, there's a background kind of conversation going on about how do we want to talk to the city about funding for maintenance and stuff like that, especially of buildings and infrastructure. So those are the things that I'm going to be concerned with to the department heads. Thank you.
You have one question. Maybe you can explain it to me offline too if you want. The other expenditures, that 122% increase, what all falls in there again?
Oh.
That's one from
president pay.
No, the third line from the bottom, Karla, and the expenditures. Yeah, we talked about that the other day. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you look at the top to other financing sources, that is also up. And most of that is Water and Light are going to be doing more streetlights this year than they have in the past. And so what they do is they put the streetlights up, then they pass the asset to us. So it's basically up there and down on that other line, so.
Anybody else have anything? Sorry. Mr. Larson?
Yeah, one real quick question. I know it's getting late. I wasn't here when you guys put all the hard work in to get the reserves up to where they need to be. But was there a certain goal or, like a percentage, 50% of the annual operating is kind of what I'm assuming it was?
In the range 35
to 50. Yeah, roughly 35 to 50, and we got it to the 50% and even maybe a little north of it.
50.
Okay. That's all. Just curious. Thanks.
Anybody else have anything? I see none either.
Thank you.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So, move.
Moved by Demers. Second by Larson. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. Means adjourned.